Hello, everybody. Welcome to one more big unit of World War II, designed for rapid fire rules and in 20 millimeter size. So, this group here that you see of machines and figures is the US 1st Armored Division in Tunisia in end of 1942 up to the first quarter of 1943. So it is meant to, of course, to participate in those very famous actions in which the Green American Army suffered a lot, like Sidi Bouzid, Jebel Souda, Kasserine Pass, all those things. So it was something that I wanted to do for many years, and I mean, in the last few years, I've been gathering some material for it. But very quickly, as I started to read about the issue, especially from the modeling point of view, I started to see that it was not very easy to use my 1944, 6 to 8 Sherman tank battalions in this one. And the reason is that of course, this division was composed of much older material, especially the M4 Sherman, still with M3 bogies, for instance, and also the M4A1, also with the M3 bogies. So it is something like this, like I can show you here. So all the bogies you see, also the older mantlet, the M34 mantlet, not the more famous M34A1 mantlet, nor of course the more famous M4 bogies. So it, as most of the tanks had this characteristic. So I started to invest a little bit of time in building this kind of unit. Also, there were also the famous Lees also in the 2nd Battalion of the 13th Regiment. And the reason for that is that many of the Shermans from this division went to the British and participated in the Al Alamein battle. And the reason was that the ones that were originally sent to the British were sunk in the middle of the Atlantic, so by the Germans, of course. And so the First Armored lent some of the their tanks to the British. So it had to do with what they had left, which were these not as effective as the Sherman M3 Lees. Another particularity of the division, which makes it, for me at least, more or less mandatory to be built, is that there are a few other material that you can't really find almost anywhere else. Like, for instance, like the famous Dodge weapons carrier here, or for instance the famous M3 half track with the 75 millimeter French gun, the HMC. So these kind of things that were inside the first armored, made it almost mandatory to be built from the origin. And of course, there's another reason for it. It is, of course, the camouflage. The camouflage is very simple. It's the normal olive green, but of course, there are a few particularities. First of all, many of its tanks had American flags painted because of the peril of French, especially French friendly fire. They didn't know really if the French would be friends or not. So they were painting the American flags, the star and stripes, in many of their vehicles. Also, these blue and yellow symbols, and mostly, of course, the yellow symbols that you can see all over the division. Because initially, it was not used white on the division, but instead of that, yellow, which was in fact the color that arrived in North Africa with the Shermans and other material of the division, and in fact with plenty of other units, American units that went to North Africa. Also, for instance, the half tracks need to be the original, the first versions with that bumper with famous roller in French style, no pulpit yet for the Brownings, and also the M3A1s for the for the Stuarts light tanks. So plenty of particularities, which, well, made the will of making this division to grow inside of me. Also, as I started to read about the division, I found some funny characteristics. For instance, um, uh, about the composition of the division, which was different from the future light or heavy divisions that the U.S. Army will use to counter the Germans in Europe, and that is their main um, organization. So the division had only one regiment of armored infantry. This is only one battalion. I'll tell you later why it's only one battalion. So they had three of these battalions, which was considered very little for an armored unit. There were two battalions. This is much less than two battalions. Then we'll also speak about that later. There were two battalions of M3 Stuarts in each of the tank regiments, and there were each of the regiments at two battalions of Sherman, or one battalion of Sherman and one battalion of M3 Lees. So total of 6 tank battalions. Then there was already also a tank destroyer battalion. There was 3 battalions of M7 priests. So the division was quite well furnished with everything that was necessary, with the problem of having little infantry. So why do I only make this, for instance? First reason for only making a few of the M3s is that they participated relatively little in combat. For instance, for you to see, 98 Shermans, like these ones here, were destroyed by the Germans in those famous mid-February actions, but in fact, only 2 of these were destroyed. So they saw very little action. And so I didn't invest much time in building or painting M3 models. Instead of that, I tried to apply myself into the Sherman concept, if I can say so. So, as I told you, M4 and M4A1s. Most of the M4s were built in a factory called what was the name of that thing? It was the Pressed Steel Company, and the most of the M4A1s with the rounder structures, as everybody knows, which was in fact the biggest cast piece in the world on those days. It was this hull of this M4A1 Sherman. This guy here, they were built mostly in the Lima and in Pacific factories. So 3 factories with slight differences between models contributed to the build-up of this big unit. The Americans, as you know, don't make any distinction between using M4 or M4A1. For them, it's the same. So up to the end of the war, even some of these vehicles in this exact format, with M34 mantlets, with M3 bogies, some of them even participated up to 1945 in the war. So you can use, of course, if you want, units, models and units from other periods, from later periods, if you don't want to bother making it from scratch. And I'll show you that I will also do the same if necessary. So the particularities of this unit, for instance, the first regiment, first tank regiment, had in its second battalion, which was the first with Shermans, had, for instance, very large numbers that you can see here. It was one of the particularities. For instance, in the third battalion, which was the one also from the first regiment, it had, for instance, the famous Iron Fist painted at the front of its tanks. It is particularities which makes modeling this unit also funny as you understand. Also, the M3 Lees, for instance, of the 2nd Battalion of the 13th Regiment, had big numbers painted in the front. As you can see here, it's another particularity. Even some of them having the American Star and Stripes. That you can also see, for instance, here in the sides of the M3 Stuarts. Also, so let's talk a little bit now about models. I mean, as you can see here, the most of these M3s are Matchbox. There's an Hasegawa over there with an older turret, not very correct, but I mean passable. You need to have these scout cars, for instance, for the command of the battalions of infantry, mechanized infantry, which are the scout cars from Esci. And then if you use the Airfix M3s, you are okay. Don't forget to take the pulpit out. Over there, it's an M4 from Hasegawa, but converted into the M3 version by taking out the much bigger front bumper and taking, of course, also the pulpit for the MG, and the rest is relatively okay. And it became an M4 with the 81mm mortar. Another interesting thing is that you can use some 37mm guns, which were no longer used by the Americans in the European theater of war, because they were, of course, not proper for 1943 actions. The figures are, I mean, as you can see, mostly Esci and older Airfix and several brands. Hasegawa also, and a number of different brands are contributing to this one. Coming to the Sherman, or the tank battalions, if you want, you have here some ready to roll M8 HMCs. Also here the MiniGeneral M41. Here is the Sherman from the M41 from Esci. Here the M4 from Airfix. Airfix also, Airfix and Esci mixed in the rest of the companies. Both M4 and M41 living together in harmony. Here, mostly, as you can see, MiniGeneral 3D prints. Some of them already have the rollers, the boogie, sorry, of the M4, because in fact the Americans arrived with M3 boogies, and then the replacement tanks, most of them arrived already with M4 boogies. Still, everything had in Tunisia the M34 mantlet. Don't forget that part. The only thing I did to these MiniGeneral Shermans, the only thing I changed was the gun barrel, which is too thick. So I used some thinner plastic to try to make the 75mm a little bit more accurate. So there is a dodge for the command over here of General Ward, who is somewhere there giving orders, of course. This is a die-cast American staff car that I found, a Dodge also, I think, if not mistaken. But pretty reasonable in terms of scale, in terms of, and I think around 170 scale, so quite okay for our scale, for our beloved 20mm size, of course. Here you see Major Jim, one of the tank commanders of the 13th Regiment, in this case 2nd Battalion, the one that was mostly equipped with M3 Lees. And this one, if I'm not mistaken, is what? Most probably Sherman by Esci, with some converted boogies to look like the M3 boogies. And the M3s are a mixture. This one, when you have it on your hand, you notice immediately that is Altaia, a die-cast model, and most of the others are, I mean, I think this one might be even Airfix, and This one here, most probably, yeah, Hasegawa for sure. Very famous by its two tank commanders. Coming to the tank destroyer battalion. Tank destroyer battalion has these ones I think are mostly Airfix, M3 based half tracks, and then with scratch built turrets and guns to look like the French 75mm gun of World War I origin that was used as anti-tank gun. Several of the companies, as you can see here, are coupled with the famous Dodge with 37mm gun, and these ones are, of course, Esci models with a few more crew members. Total of 4 in each of the Dodge. So, and now finally to this, in terms of table, because I want to show you a few more things. You can see here mostly Matchbox M7 priests. Okay, built straight from the box without many concerns. Matchbox model is very good because it has the M3 boogies, which is the one you need for Tunisia, and a few jeeps with, for instance, with older Brownings as used in Tunisia, and the rest is more or less the same. Now you can, I mean, I have enough stuff to make the full division. For instance, if I use a small number of those 6 M3 stewards over there to supplement the 4 on the table, you have one full battalion. I can also use, for instance, to make a full infantry regiment. In the case of the 1st Armored Division, it was the 6th. You can use, I mean, a few of these M3 stewards. Also for the reconnaissance regiment, I can also use the ones from later periods. And even to make the last battalion, the missing battalion of Shermans on the table, I can use this group here of, I hope you can see them, of 9 Shermans with M34 mantlets still, and the older versions of the Sherman, and these ones are obviously Airfix. So I still have them in this much larger group for my first my heavy armor division in later war periods, and of course I can also take some infantry from the shelves of my American infantry division. So I mean, with a little bit more of work, you could see here the entire division, but I'm just showing you here the models that were built just on purpose for the Tunisian actions of the 1st Armored Division. And I think everything is seen and explained. I mean, seen is for sure, explained, I mean, I can never be sure. But okay, hope you have enjoyed, and see you next with another big unit. Bye bye. Thank you. Cheers.